Um, and so I was close to making up my mind that I wanted to make a video like this, but then there was still this voice of doubt in the back of my mind. I was like, I really don't want to look back with regret about doing something like this. What if it turns out that I'm not being fair to her opponents? So I was like, okay. There was an upcoming event for both candidates, opportunity where you can come hear them speak on the same day at the same time. So I had to choose one or the other. If you want to say such nasty negative things about Ms. Huang, then you should learn more about her so that you can be more confident about doing so. Made sense. So I went way out of my way to go see her. I actually had to go down a road that didn't have a sidewalk. Funny how we're talking about this in this very video. Policies can sound far away, can sound very heady, somewhere over there. Sometimes they really matter. Sometimes you can find yourself experiencing a very concrete example of what the difference means. I had to bike on a road that had a 45 mile per hour speed limit just to get there. That's how much I care, by the way. And so I went to hear Bella speak to a small audience. And from that experience, there was a lot of negative things, but there was also a few positives. And I took notes, and I'd like to read to you the nice positive things, so that before I launch into all the many negatives, this sort of fun climax of the video, I would like to add some nuance to this conversation by pointing out that I'm not saying that she's the worst candidate who ever lived, right? When I spoke with her one-on-one, she was friendly, and she said, "Oh, you must be one of those people who I knocked on your door and I inspired you. That or someone who works for me knocked on your door, right?" That it sounds to me she knocked on a lot of doors already, very vigorous about going door to door and making sure that people heard from her or her team directly. I respect that she put so much effort into this. And she did seem a little bit surprised when I told her, actually, no, you didn't. To which we kind of discussed, and we found out the reason why was because I live in an apartment complex and there's company policies. I don't remember the details. And so I was touched by the fact that she really wants to reach people. She's a mother. She's a mother of many kids. I have a lot of respect for parents. In the way that she's a mother, she's also a PTA volunteer. I think that's very good in the way that it demonstrates caring about the community and your kids. Demonstrates not just a mother, but the right kind of mother. Both Miss Miller and Miss Huang really like greenways. I like green. Again, this is not the most libertarian thing, to be fair, but I love greenways in Cary. They help a pedestrian or a person, a handicapped person, or a biker get around really well. That's what it's more accessibility to travel around town. I love that. In fact, if I had to choose between busing and greenways, the libertarian answer is the greenways, comparatively speaking. So that's another thing to keep in mind. She has an MBA. She studied business. She graduated. That's good. She has a small business. She's a small business owner. That's another green flag. Hey, I'm a small business owner. I can relate. Some of the best politicians ever have been small business owners, to be clear. She was often very vague about things, but one thing that she was very clear about is that she feels like a specific addition to Cary needs to be a new kindergarten to lower the cost of childcare. This was a rare time where I really felt like Miss Huang spoke from a place of authority, like she really knew what she was talking about. And so, again, another green flag. I don't think anyone, libertarians included, want the cost of childcare to be very high. Now, granted, we often think, and I, for good reason, believe that privatization is how you make, and deregulation is how you make childcare less expensive. But not to say that her solution was a bad one, per se, even if she doesn't have a very libertarian understanding of the problem. Lastly, and I include this one last because it is it's very iffy if this is a good thing or a bad thing. She was very forward with who she is. Like, she did not hide whatsoever that she is a first-generation immigrant with a thick accent who struggles to get words out of her mouth. The fact that she's very upfront about that about herself, I think it either demonstrates that she's an idiot Or I prefer to believe that it demonstrates that she is someone who isn't like a conspiratory kind of establishment style Democrat. In sharp contrast to how the Biden administration was handled, she was instead very much willing to show her real self and be out there. Okay, so now we get to the best part of the video where I go on tirades. All right, so Huang really struggled to communicate with people. And that was a massive red flag. Yeah, I got to tell you what. Because, though, to be fair, to be an immigrant and to learn English straight from learning Chinese, I'm told is remarkably difficult. I had a friend named Connor in college who tried to do the reverse, and it stressed him out of his mind. In fact, I think, funny I mentioned this because I only just now realized that might have been the catalyst that kind of broke him and made him a really horrible human being was the hysteria and the stress of trying to learn Chinese for many semesters in a row. Our friendship had a very rocky ending, but that's besides the point. So while, yeah, it is difficult to learn English if you're a Chinese person, because the vast difference between the languages, the thing to understand is that in three different instances, I noticed that she could not understand what people were saying to her very well. That is, she kind of understood, and I had to like ask you to clarify and ask you to repeat yourself a whole lot in a way that makes me question if she knows the definitions of all the words, if they jumble up in her mind. She couldn't get the words out of her mouth, as I said. She was very bad at like translating her thoughts, and so it limited her to sound like a kind of person who has like a, I don't know, like a 6th, 7th grade level English speaker. And I'm sorry, but if your intelligence has to be filtered through 7th grade talking, then it's not the same thing as being in 7th grade, but it's a little like electing a 7th grader. Likewise, when she was answering questions at that event, in which there was not very many people and likewise not very many questions, she nevertheless could not answer a single one of them very well because each time she had a hard time, again, understanding the question and then coming up with what she was going to say for it. This was in contrast to what seemed to me well-rehearsed speech that she gave to everybody, where she was kind of explaining her platform to us as a kind of a rundown of who she was and what she stood for. I very much got the impression that this was something that she had practiced, and that she does a lot better communicating when she takes the time to think through her thoughts. To do a video like this, if she was going to make a video like this on, I don't know, the city of Cary's YouTube, she'd be good at that. But most of what you do as a council member is not premeditated. So she was able to trick people, in other words, into seeming like a good communicator in that one instance. Okay, so also to this point, when it comes to communication, she mentioned, in what might not seem related at first, over and over and over and over and over again, how desperately she was going to rely on the community's input to come up with solutions and to think through problems. That might sound nice, that's very democratic, that's very caring. Not so. But here's the thing, when you really stress it, it's a demonstration. I'm a candidate, or I was a candidate, so I can speak from experience. What this means psychologically is that you are not prepared. You don't have the answers. And sometimes I think candidates do have the answers, but they confuse servitude with leadership. They think that they can completely replace leadership with servitude, and that's what servitude leadership is. Not so. You see, the people need for you to do your job. You can't do your job if you don't have any answers. But this connects with the point of communication skills and understanding of English, because if maybe some of this desire for input kind of comes from a hardship of struggling with the job at hand, that leaves her up to, this is kind of a sub-point that's a very powerful point all of its own. It allows her to be susceptible to handlers, just like Joe Biden. So here that comparison comes back again, because and because she's been endorsed so handily by so many public school teachers and public school unions, whatever, I worry that they are very much the kind of people who could handle her in the way of like very much kind of leading her on and telling her what to think and directing her policy, I very much don't like that. Ironically, her lead for the people to give her ideas is going to fall on deaf ears with the actual people, but the very deeply politically involved kind of Wake County public school leadership, they're going to want to control someone like that. They're going to want to use their money and influence on people, and she's a very susceptible sheep to such a thing, to the wolves. In the way, it's also worth mentioning that the Democrat Party is extremely top down. There's a pecking order to the Democrat Party, way more than any other political party I know. And so she would very much be at the mercy of her leaders who would tell her what to think. Lastly, regarding this point of communication, it's not often, but there are rare times where a city council person, especially like if they're being grilled by somebody in a town hall or something, where they really need to be a quick and witty and nuanced communicator. Again, it's not often, but there are rare times where this failure of hers is going to really come back to bite her, and that she's going to be a very bad representative, and she's going to make the city of Cary look bad, and she's not going to be able to explain herself well. Even if you're a Democrat, you shouldn't want those things. This first point against Bella Huang is so important that I'd like to address one of the biggest rebuttals that I can think of to it in the way that I really want to convince you of the legitimacy of her lack of communication. She did indeed earn an MBA, so you might be thinking, if she has the skills to do that, then how come you're saying that she's a bad communicator? How can those two things be true at once? The thing is, earning an MBA, yes, it's a challenge. I have a business concentration, which for those of you who don't know, is a lot like getting a minor in business when you're going through a 4-year degree. And from that experience, I saw firsthand the challenges that come with the coursework for that stuff. However, there are 3 skills that you need if you want to get an MBA, I think, which are diligence, mild intelligence, and rote memorization. Modern universities, in the way that they are left-leaning, do not punish presenters who give presentations if their English skills aren't very good. In fact, I doubt that universities have had that as a practice, in that it seems that many university professors are themselves from other countries and they themselves don't speak English very well. So it would be very hypocritical for a university to punish students if their own faculty can't handle that. Lastly, regarding this, having mild communication and diligence and ability to memorize are useful skills when you're a council member, but they are very much held back if you're not good at communication, and are, I would say, the bare minimum that you should have when being a city council member. Same with being a good communicator. And so because she lacks one of those things, I'm not going to praise her and say that her degree is a sign that she should be elected. It's at this moment that I'd like to pause and interject that if you don't have a good picture in your mind of relaying a past experience, to reiterate, I was invited to a small venue where besides myself, there were only a small number of activists, middle-aged or older, as well as some well-connected individuals, as well as people from the Democrat Party. Bella Huang gave a short speech and answered a very small number of questions. I knew immediately from chatting with her before she gave her speech and everybody sat down, the point that I had just discussed with communication, but it wasn't until I really started hearing her give her speech that I learned of a second criticism I have of her. She talked early in that speech about wanting to increase the revenue that the city brings in to counteract the spending that she talks about throughout her speech. So this is a thing that Democrats and Republicans alike typically do, which is that while Republicans will sometimes talk about reducing taxes, they nevertheless tend to ultimately not reduce spending all that much. And as such, because they want to reduce taxes, they need to find some other way to pay for that. So they sometimes go in debt, or they sometimes will find revenue resources elsewhere, because Democrats want to increase spending and keep taxes the same, which likewise needs to be paid for somehow. So again, debt or inflation or new revenue streams. In that way, I was very disappointed to hear that of her, that she give us an idea of just how much new spending that she wants. She's not going to reallocate spending from elsewhere. She's actually going to just increase all spending in general. and to such a big degree that she made the very first thing that she wanted to talk about her anxiety with regards to the city not having enough money to afford the things she wants to do. When a Democrat wants to increase revenue to go along with new spending, I don't see that as a uniquely left-wing thing. I see that as authoritarian. Although spending money on things isn't necessarily authoritarian in any way, that's kind of the left-wing aspect of it. The taking money from people is. And in the way that it's on a tax button, instead a very weaselly way to accumulate money, it could take the form of telling, say, a small business owner who wants to start a hair salon or some such, that you have to pay an $1,000 fee just to get a license to do what you do, or something to that effect. What I just mentioned is more of a NCGA kind of a action, but the general idea is the same. If she wants to increase revenue streams and doesn't want to use taxes, it's the same general idea that they're going to find ways to nickel and dime you and everybody in the city in such a way that will perhaps kind of slip under the radar. But if you really examine the flow of money, you might notice the little tiny times when the city gets in your way. Parking in a publicly owned parking lot perhaps will have like a meter where you have to pay an exorbitant fee to do downtown activities or something. Maybe the city then says that no private business is allowed to operate such things, and that most of the parking lots could be bought out by the city in the downtown area. That's just a hypothetical of what could happen, not something that's on her platform. The sad thing about increasing revenue and increasing spending is that the government is very inferior at that actual activity done through the spending. It's in relative terms bad. That the government will often take the place of something else by choosing to spend in the way that they want to not leave it to chance but force something to happen. But ironically, the government is a bad fiduciary and is an uncaring bureaucratic organization. And so when they go about important things, they sometimes ensure a worse overall outcome for the thing that they claim to care about. Once again, I apologize for the time of day changing constantly. This is driving me nuts. I've been recording these videos for many sessions now. The next flaw I noticed about Bella Huang in her speech to everybody at that meeting, I was originally going to talk about this for a very brief time because I didn't have a whole lot to say about it. But then, funny thing, I was thinking about the role of a city council member, and I realized that I had caught her in a mistake. She had told everybody in her speech that she wanted teacher pay to be raised, and that she used the example of teachers fleeing North Carolina as her quick justification for why she feels that way. The problem is, she has no control over teacher pay, but she made it sound as if she did in the context of the speech she was giving. You see, the NCGA, and to a lesser degree, the county and the superintendent is actually the groups that control that whatsoever. So, as a junior member of the city council, she has zero control over this issue, but she talked about it as if it was some major crisis. And that's the other thing, is that it's not even a crisis to begin with. Teacher pay was just raised this year. Either she's not aware of that, which is quite possible, or she just actively hopes that nobody in the audience knew of this fact. Because it could very well be that the not so modest, probably adequate sized pay raise is going to make the difference of quelling the amount of leaving that happens with teacher turnover. But the thing is, it was fine before the teacher pay raise, ironically. We didn't even need one in the first place this year because the teacher turnover rate was at about 8%. Same it's been for a long decade now, and it's not ever been a problem in North Carolina being able to retain or have enough teachers in her state. So either Bella is lying to her audience, or she just doesn't even understand what she is capable of as a city council member, and I don't know which is worse. One of them shows gross incompetence, the other one shows a destruction of trust between her and the people. Soon after, in the speech, she said to her audience that she wants to represent and reinforce the 20% of Cary which happens to be an Asian population. Now, it might be easy to say, well, it's good when there is representation in television, say, for like a young black girl delights in seeing a young black girl character in a TV show. This is not the same thing, okay? You see, what she just said is basically racial supremacy. It's effectively no different from white supremacy, except Asian supremacy in her case. What she just said is that she would like to hand out tribal favors. And really, nobody ought to be voting because somebody shares your identity or you think that they're going to treat you better than they will treat other people. Last I checked, we're all American citizens, and that's the thing that matters most about us, not the color of our skin. I would like to read to you the next bulletin from my outline of this speech, where I say, a focus on intersectionality and collective identity is crass. I think that's a pretty epic line that speaks for itself, but what I'm trying to say by it is that it's disgustingly ugly and lazy to look at the whole population of Cary and break it down only into a few large groups. Say, well, this is the Asian population here, and this is the lower half of wealth, white people, and this is the upper wealth of white people. For example, you might have a few other smaller fractions of the pie. If you choose to look at the world through this lens, and people shouldn't, because it says that people need to be talked about and stressed about and focused on as massive groups. In contrast to Bella, I have noticed that there are some Democratic voters who often look back at, say, the desegregation age with fondness, and they say that it was a great idea to bring school children together of all kinds of backgrounds so that they come together into a melting pot of one culture in one America. This is a very pragmatic thing to do. It's arguably a nationalistic dream. Even though I am a libertarian, I can appreciate that unity causes peace, and that's very good for a nation and for its longevity, as I've mentioned. I've talked before about how spending money to elevate certain cultures above certain other ones is a horrible use of money, but that's for multiple reasons. Not only is it morally bankrupt because it takes from people, forcing culture on a people causes it to become something of a war, where Team Blue and Team Red think of themselves as within their power to decide the culture for its people, if only they can get elected they themselves, when in fact the people lose because they don't want to have culture forced upon them. This ends up being a loss for multiculturalism because it breeds resentment. This is why libertarians want a ceasefire. We would like to see culture be voluntary, but permitted as a right in the way of, say, free speech. I think that Democrats and even Republicans should really look towards the way that restaurants, for example, have soothed the hearts of voluntary attendees and causes them to become desensitized to the exoticness of the culture in question, for it to be that melting pot that the Democrats long for. So shortly thereafter, Bella spoke about wanting to add things to the community through the government, that she wanted a bridge, more activities at the community center, or perhaps a second community center, like the one that's downtown, more money spent on public transportation, and adding pickleball courts to the elderly care centers that we have here in Cary. I'm not going to say anything against the bridge because from what she said, it sounded like a reasonable addition. And likewise, that plenty of people quite benefit greatly from public transportation, and the way that a common theme of these videos is how important being able to get around is to me, and the way that I'm a moderate, that I'm really not in the mood to attack busing and attack bridges and what have you and roads. But when it comes to, say, elderly care centers or kindergartens, I do think that those, by contrast, are, and not even the activity community centers, even those I think have some sort of a purpose for being funded by the government that I'm not certain that they would exist without the government, and I'm kind of glad that they do. But again, with the kindergartens and the elderly care centers, there's really no reason either one of those should be run by a government, because those are very classic, simple, straightforward examples of things that a nonprofit organization or a profit organization could run better for all the same reasons I've said already, that they're driven by people who are firsthand caring individuals, think intelligently like entrepreneurs about how to run the place best to maximize satisfaction with keeping costs low for competition's sake, and ensuring that there's the right amount when people need them, that there's not too many or too few of any number of centers, as happens with central planning. And again, I really must emphasize that faraway bureaucrats are really terrible at knowing what a community needs and how to go about the most efficient care provision. One of the last things that Bella Huang said in her speech was that she was often approached by HOA people and activists within a neighborhood who would talk about the needs of their specific neighborhood, which is to say, sounded to me like not in my backyard types, who did not want variation in housing whatsoever, not in their neighborhood, not in any part near to them, and did not want any kind of variety of zoning. And then after her speech, she had a question and answer segment, and one of the questions was from somebody who made a intellectual point about how Cary seems to be having a problem in which there's a brain drain. People with degrees are leaving to go find greener pastures. And so Bella thought about this earnestly and said that she would want to look into it and try to solve this problem without going into any specifics whatsoever. And it was at that time that I had the thought to myself that Democrat cities always end up this way, that Cary has ended up. It's always the Democrat cities, isn't it, that are hyper expensive, that people want to leave, as is the case in places like Boston, Chicago, LA, and New York City. So we can ascertain that Democrats, to their very core, are very bad on these issues. The very priorities that they have are comparatively worse than Republicans, but that doesn't necessarily preclude Republicans from criticism in this matter. Because you see, the thing that people want in a city is the freedom to do. So three things really limit that, which are laws that prevent you from doing certain things, monetary restrictions that hamper enterprise, and the combination of regulations and zoning, which limit what a city can be and what people within a city can achieve. Cary specifically has two major problems, among probably many other ones, which are that up until recently there was a massive campaign to plant trees everywhere in the city, which was very expensive, but to be fair, gave the city something of a unique identity, which I can appreciate. On the other hand, as well, it has continuously spent, as I've said, a lot of money on cultural programs and events for the public. The fact that Bella was so concerned specifically about the not in our backyard types really demonstrates that she does not understand this problem in the slightest, because there is a fundamental, diametrically opposed, polar opposite nature going on between these two things that she talked about, ironically, so close together at the end of her speech and the beginning of answering questions, and didn't see the contradiction so close to her eyes. You are trying to solve this problem, and she's going to have to choose one or the other, and I really don't know which one she's going to choose. I remember I had been asked once upon a time why I didn't want to vote for Kamala Harris, and I explained part of the reason why, among many other reasons being that I'm a libertarian, of course, was that she didn't seem consistent on issues. There was really no telling what she would actually do if elected. I really did not know if she would build the wall like Trump would, or if she would be very lax on immigration. I honestly did not know her heart on that or many other issues. Fracking, approach to foreign policy, I didn't know. And so Bella reminds me of that deeply frustrating kind of fake politician who tells you one thing and then ends up doing something totally different because they don't have a plan, or they don't really feel like cluing you into what they're going to do. It's just not acceptable. Lastly, regarding this, if you would like to learn more about this topic or similar heady topics, I get a lot of my information on these things from think tanks. Four of them specifically come to mind, which are libertarianism.org, the Reason Foundation, the Cato Institute, and FEE.org. So check out any of their websites, and you will be shocked by the amazing amount of scholarly research and clear rationale that's put forward by them. Okay, so that wraps up my criticisms of Huang. So anyway, I, from all of this, had made up my mind about who I'm going to vote for between Renee Miller and Huang, and I hope this has helped you to make up your mind as well about which is the person better deserving your vote. Because after all, I think with voting, it's as much about keeping somebody out of power as much as it is putting somebody into power. And this is not to say that I have full faith in Renee Miller, that I think that she'd be perfect from a libertarian perspective, or really from a neutral perspective either, because I truly believe deeply that, to give a random example, zoning and regulation are extremely important to the success of Cary, but unfortunately I'm not convinced at all that a Republican candidate is going to be significantly better on that issue than a Democrat. It's all the more reason that I'm rather distraught about the fact that very few libertarians run for office on a city level, when in fact that is where they have the best chance of winning. If I wasn't so preoccupied with my dire financial situation and the fact that I'm kind of tired from having ran for office in 2024 for publicity reasons, publicity for the party and not for myself, I would have wanted to do this too. As you saw, I had not very seriously announced in an earlier moment a write-in campaign for my own self because, gosh darn it, there needs to be more libertarians running for office in times like this, for situations like this. But that being said, regardless of what you end up doing, I will also ask that you consider more than just voting, but please go to the websites of the people I have mentioned, these 4 candidates, and also consider sharing this video with other people in Cary. I put so much work into this video series, and I would very much love for a large number of people to just sit down and consider what I have to say. I'm not asking for them to agree with me, but I think you must agree with that. With all the effort that is put into this, and with all my good intentions, and with all the need for citizens to be engaged with politics and to be well informed, that you would be doing yourself a disservice not to watch these videos to the end and not to share them with people. Because sharing it with people is not saying that you must agree with everything I say. Sharing it is a way of saying that this guy actually took the time to really learn about these candidates and to try to bring rational opinions and facts to the lot of us. We should honor that. Because, frankly, I can think of few things more disgraceful than going to vote when you don't know much about the candidates and you don't even realize how little you know about the candidates. So make me proud. Do the right thing. I'll see you out there.